I'm very boring. I'm from ESCOM, and I thought economics interests me more than technology sometimes. I am somewhat technical. And you mentioned market-driven as the process for new build in the UK. And much is made of the fact that the overnight cost of heating point C is something over $7,000 a kilowatt. Very gently, slightly obscene in real numbers. To what extent do you believe this is a function of your contract for differences policy? Let me explain it more than I'll. You go to an industry and say, I will pay you so much for energy if it's carbon free, and I will give wind turbines over £100. The cheapest, basically the cheapest other source of low carbon energy is onshore wind, and your contract for differences for that is about £105, I think, a megawatt hour. And if somebody tells me my competitor is £105 a megawatt hour, I will then say, well, I'll ask for 95, which is, I think, what EDF actually did. And then work backwards to how much must my plant cost if I'm going to justify that price to you.
Yeah.
Any comments on that? Because you seem to have got the worst of all worlds with your energy policy. Your wind turbines are costing you roughly twice what it is here because of our process and the competitive bidding in South Africa. Nuclear seems to be the same way, and I'm just concerned because you're not become the reference of cost. And you've made that cost twice what everyone else in the world thinks is reasonable.
So, I mean, I'm not an economics expert, and if Jürgen Hay was here, and Jürgen Hay is I'm thinking that he'd be a really interesting person, actually, to invite to give a presentation here. He would be able to take you through the minutiae of how we came to this position. And it isn't just about the overnight costs. When he explains it to me, there are a whole series of other aspects which makes this a sensible decision for the UK, and actually not economically as poor as you've just said. Now, I don't remember the details of that, and I will be amiss if I try to sort of go through that with you. Jürgen is definitely the guy to invite. But it isn't as stark, I don't think, as you say. I'm really interested in the wind issue. I hadn't appreciated that your onshore wind is half the cost of our onshore wind. And I don't understand how you can how you've come to that position. I mean, the cost of the plant is such that it is the majority of the cost, my understanding is, of our onshore wind.
And the profit that comes from it.
Okay.
Your return on capital is a function of, if you tell me that I've got a price of X, I can back calculate the return. I may not at half, but I certainly know at the moment we're quoting figures below a rand. For the present round of wind is below a rand a kilowatt hour, which is about 50 pounds a megawatt hour. About 50 pounds a megawatt hour is the South African cost we're now contracting for wind. Right. And your contract for differences is over £100.
So are these, why are we more exposed? Is it siting costs at the UK, which is different to South Africa?
You've got an opinion. I can't comment. I'm not involved in our wind programme, except to look at the numbers. I'm not involved in them. Yeah. The short answer is it's called competition. If you tell somebody the price is 105, they will work at them again. If you say I'm going out to bid and the cheapest 1,000 megawatts I'll build, you force competition. That's the problem I'm saying, is with your process to combat differences, what you said to every nuclear builder is I will pay you £93 a megawatt hour for power.
Well, actually, we haven't said to all of them. What we've
No,
done is
but
we've done that.
I'm in the negotiation discussion, so you've just given it to the French, so I'll go down to 89 and I'll be nice. Rather than saying,
Not the French.
well, can I be somewhat cynical for a second and say I think we've got a problem, madam, in about 15 years' time, when there's £1 billion a year profit coming out of Hinkley Point C, being paid as dividend to the French and the Chinese governments, you're going to have some interesting internal challenges in the country.
Yes, I mean, my understanding is that the way that the contract for difference process has been worked up is that if there are those sorts of profits, then those profits revert back to HMG.
You've got told it's 10% real with certain investments on the total invested amount, on the total spent amount. That's the kind of profit you get from that. It's very simple. Calculators aren't complicated.
Well,
So the present sums tell me that calculation is not, if you get beyond that, maybe, but after that, you're going to be having several £100 million a year paid to the French and Chinese governments by the UK government.
if they build.
If they build.
They haven't actually made a decision to actually build.
Well, they are going through many problems themselves.
They are. So it may be that they don't in fact build. And then we will go to the boiling water reactor 80,000, and the contract for difference negotiations will be different.
I'm not an expert in those fields, but it just strikes me.
But it would be really interesting to get Hergen down.
Yes, it would.
Actually, that would be really, that might be a very interesting discussion indeed.
I mean, the South African
He's a great
approach
speaker.
on the renewables programme has driven down costs extraordinarily, particularly in this latest fourth round and possible fourth plus round.
Yeah.
And obviously, in the UK on the wind side, we're putting our money into tidal offshore wind,
No, we're offshore wind, not tidal.
which is obviously, well, and tidal is somewhat different, which is obviously more expensive. But I think it would be interesting to talk about the economics, and certainly
Yeah.
I think governments will not wish to be blind to the future consequences of their models.
Well, as you can see, I certainly have a lot to learn, and maybe we have a lot to learn from the South African experience. That'd be
Yeah.
interesting.
Thank you.
Okay. I'm on the mic. I'm Isaac Salahe from the DST, Department of Science and Technology.
Yes.
I just want to find your position on enrichment, conversion, and reprocessing, and on the side of your nuclear research reactors. What are the main uses for your research reactors?
So we don't have any research reactors in the UK at the moment. The last one was a training reactor in particular, was Consort at Imperial College, and we shut that down about a year and a half ago. So at the moment, well, there is a critical assembly at Rolls-Royce, but in terms of research reactors for civil nuclear, we don't have any. What we do have is we have research reactors that generate neutrons. But that's not for nuclear energy specifically, that's a much broader issue. We are actually looking at the moment into having an active station at either ISIS or Diamond. Diamond is the synchrotron, to be able to look at a whole new set of practical materials issues, but we haven't actually got that at the moment. But in terms of what we think of as a test reactor for nuclear, we no longer have any at all. Well, we have one submarine, one reactor at the moment, but that will be decommissioned soon as well. What was the other part of your question?
Enrichment, conversion.
So enrichment is done on a commercial basis. We have a company owned by the UK, Germany and Holland, which is still owned by those three countries via treaty. That may or may not change over the next few years. We're not sure yet. That's again in discussion. But that's under IAEA safeguards. It's just a commercial company which operates. The U battery project, however, is a Urenco project. And Urenco have actually put their own money into that project itself. And the last part of the question was reprocessing. And at the moment, the reprocessing facilities at Sellafield are due to be shut in 2018, unless there is a reassessment of that coming up, which they may or may not be. I think it's probably the best way.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will make my comment brief, and then we'll come back to the renewable energy and nuclear energy in the context of South Africa. We have, at the moment, we have 42 gigawatt of capacity. As the integrated resource plan, which is promulgated by the minister, we will have to have 82 gigawatt by 2030.
Yeah.
And there is 99.6 gigawatt of nuclear capacity. The problem South Africa, we need base load power plants. We cannot do without it. That's why the renewable, although they say that there is 17% will be in 2030, I don't see it will be materialized because it is different than the European context where countries can supplement each other. And they have a grid which is integrated. So in South Africa, it seems that because at the moment we are producing 90% of those 42 gigawatt from coal capacity. And the emission is huge. That's why we have to reduce this emission by incorporating in the nuclear, in the electricity supply infrastructure, this nuclear capacity. So when I look at the renewables and its cost and its role, I'm not sure that I can see it in the future in the context of South Africa. And it happens that most of the time when we talk about renewables, we don't factorize the environmental hazards of the renewable energy and the cost. This is my comment.
So in terms of the issue with renewables, then a high penetration of renewables does require different way of thinking about the backup in case there is a loss of those renewables, if you're talking about wind in particular. And energy storage is the way that is usually considered. There's an awful lot more work needs to be done, and people are ramping up activities associated with energy storage. Energy storage is not by definition, but by usually we think of that in terms of a local context. I think the smart cities type of activities, which the UK is very interested in, we have a smart cities catapult indeed now, the way that you have that storage built into your smart cities type of activity will remediate the issue of the of renewable energy the renewable energy problems. I'm thinking in particular, for example, of electric cars, where the actual batteries in the electric cars are a distributed energy storage environment, which in a smart city is built into the infrastructure to begin with. So actually, I think in the long run, associated with much cleverer ways of thinking about urban renewal, then actually I think renewable energy will become easier to implement. My personal opinion is that renewable energy along with nuclear, and nuclear doesn't really help you in your intermittency, because as you said, it's base load capacity. You can't, taking it on and off is extremely difficult to do. You disagree, you think you can take it on?
I just think that, so let's be careful. The initial nuclear power stations were submarines.
Yeah.
They can load follow like you don't want to believe. Because nuclear fuel costs is about 1/10 of coal fuel costs, then we optimise our nuclear plants to be purely base load 24/7. But if somebody says you want to load follow, the French did it.
Well, the French did it, but you know what it did to their fuel.
We haven't engineered, but all the fuel engineering for the last 30 years has been towards base load approaches.
Yes.
If you ask a submariner,
But
many years ago.
the fuel in submarines, which is very, very different beast indeed, and particularly for British submarines. So, you know, the load following there is a completely, so we could not do it with conventional designs of
You'd have to optimise the plant to load follow. We haven't chosen to do that for the last 50 years.
Yes, okay.
But theoretically, I'd say now a coal station, at the moment today, as of this moment, on the ESCOM grid, the base load machine with the greatest theoretical manoeuvrability is Coburg. It can change load faster than a coal station can. Because your coal station has to put all the coal into the boiler, and so changing power is a major activity.
Right.
We don't do it at Coburg because Coburg's got 3 cents a unit fuel cost, so it's not worth doing it.
And if we're going to be extreme, my personal opinion, in terms of hydrocarbons, is that hydrocarbons is a fantastic resource to exploit, but exploiting it in terms of burning it to produce electricity is completely insane. I think in 300-400 years' time, people will look back at us now and say, yeah, well, I know, but our grandchildren's grandchildren's grandchildren will look back at us and think we were completely mad for burning hydrocarbons when we should have been using them to produce plastics and polymers. You know, why do you start here on the free energy and then you take it down there to produce electricity, where you should be starting there in free energy and going up there to produce polymers and plastics, which actually, if in a you can use in a sustainable environment. It's a challenge, but you can do that, and then they are there again for you, you know, time after time after time. Frankly, I think doing that is completely insane. But I don't think we shouldn't be exploiting hydrocarbon resources. I think we should be, but I think we should be doing it for the right reasons. And I think you can't do an awful lot with uranium, other than using it for producing electricity. You know, I don't think in 300 years they'll look back on us and think, gosh, that uranium stuff, they really should have been using it for making something out of it. They will be thinking, why weren't they using it to produce the electricity? Why were they burning hydrocarbons instead? That's my rant over with.
Thank you.
I'm glad you spend quite a bit of time on the competency issues, because when I look at the South African scenario, I don't think we are equipping ourselves in terms of competencies. If indeed we do go for nuclear one, I'm still not convinced that we're going to go for it, purely from an economic point of view. But I think we will be held to ransom by other countries because we don't have our own competencies. So,
yeah.
And I think the thing that we've got to do in South Africa is make a categorical decision that are we going for nuclear one or not? Our president stood up and said, no, we're going for it. But I'm not convinced. But the key factor here is, do we have the competencies ourselves? And I don't see anything getting done on that issue. Thank you.
Well, I mean, okay, so I would be utterly delighted if the UK and South Africa could help each other in the core competencies agenda. I mean, the reason I'm here again, and the reason I'm going down to SciFest, is I want to personally demonstrate the UK's commitment to partnering with South Africa. I mean, we were talking about this morning. The UK has to decide of a set of countries with which it wishes to be a long-term sustainable partner. And this means flows of people both directions, and I'm hearing a fair number of UK accents in the audience. I was in Australia last week and similarly, and these are natural partnerships. They are partnerships that will work and will be sustainable for many, many decades if we put the effort into doing that. But the movement of people has to be both ways, and traditionally it has, and I see no reason why it shouldn't continue in that regard. But sometimes countries forget about their friends, and they forget to remind their friends that actually this is a special partnership. And so that's what is motivating at the moment.
Thank you.
I have a question related to the last couple of slides. The ones on residual stress and the engine X environment. In your research program, how much emphasis are you putting on new joining technologies such as laser welding, friction welding to build into the new process?
A lot. If you look, for example, in terms of our international engagement with India, I'm going to, of course, utterly fail. But here, characterizing it. No, that's not the one. Okay, irradiation effects and flow localization of zirconium alloys, joint RR, and Indo-UK collaboration in joining technologies. So you can see what that's telling you is there's a lot of expertise in the UK in nuclear joining technologies on things like stress corrosion cracking, but dissimilar metal joins, etc., which we are then able to exploit for our collaborations with other countries, for example with India. So yeah, a lot of it.
I'm an academic, I'm a professor of chemistry, and I appreciate your comments on the efforts that have to go in energy storage.
Yeah.
And I am supporting my colleagues that call for the discussion to center around affordability, because I think that's the elephant in the room. We need to empower academics and non-partisans, people with no vested interest, to help government institutions make sensible choices. And I believe this is what is not happening, and I am afraid that academics may be pulled back and forth between vested interests and emotional interests. So I would love to hear maybe from you the reasons why you believe nuclear energy has not come down in price, as was maybe dreamt of in the 60s and the 70s.
Oh, yes. Too cheap to meter. That wasn't so bad.
And what we as academics need to guard against is to be influenced by cost models that are not inclusive of everything. And I think there are so many aspects that we need to pin down on paper so that the non-partisans, the impartial people, can make a recommendation that is socially justifiable, socially and economically justifiable. So I would love to pose a kind of a challenge. I mean, the question, can the UK afford to scale down in nuclear energy, is a valid one, just as it is a valid one, can South Africa afford to scale up on nuclear energy? Because we have totally different circumstances. So a question and a request so that we do not bypass the issues of economy. I was grateful to hear the rand per kilowatt hours quoted here, and we cannot bypass that. The capital, the financing, and the cradle to grave approach, including the salaries of all UK nuclear scientists and technologists, and academics, and bursaries. Can we really afford to play that game?
So start with the issue of energy storage. You have to have energy storage if you have high penetration of renewables. I don't see how you can do anything else. So just with the nuclear, where you have to include all the issues, I think with high penetrations of renewables, you also have to include all of the costs. And those models, whilst it's easy to say things like that, trying to actually get the models, I think there was a joke made that if you've got 10 energy economists in an audience, then you'll have 15 different models with 15 different price structures by the end of the discussion. But again, and this is not to duck the question, I'm just wondering whether that would make a really interesting UK-South Africa meeting, actually, to sort of see, because there are different circumstances and the models are required to deal with different issues. That would make quite an interesting meeting. So in terms of nuclear, why is it become more and more expensive? It's certainly, it's really, it's the reason why small modular reactors have again become discussed in the UK. It's all about the initial capital investment. In the old days when a government decided we would build a nuclear reactor and it put up the money through the tax revenue to build, then the loan issues weren't there. And for the UK, it's all about that problem, I think, really. And trying to do that through a market-driven process is a real challenge. So how will South Africa do it? How will South Africa, if it builds nuclear reactors, what model will it use? Will the government fund it? Will you use, for example, the Olympics in the UK was a real success, and it was a real financial success as well, because the UK built facilities and will now lease and sell those facilities. And that model seemed to work very well for the Olympics. Could that sort of model work better for nuclear reactors?
Perhaps to just add to that last comment of yours. My background is iron ore mining, and the iron ore industry is fairly impacted at the moment with the prices that's falling. So we're looking at ways of minerals beneficiation at source, and one of the areas that's of particular interest to me is using hydrogen as a reductant for iron ore beneficiation.
Yeah.
Now the question that I've got is these small modular reactors as a alternative use for that impact. Instead of producing electricity, utilizing that to generate hydrogen. Would that, in your opinion, be economical to do, and would there be a potential business case that one can build around it?
So, just like the issue of load following with PWR reactors, which you absolutely can do if you design the reactor in the right way, but we absolutely haven't designed the reactors in the right way at the moment. The same is true for hydrogen. You can produce, actually the PVMR model of very high temperature process heat was partly an industrial issue that was part of the project. So you can design nuclear systems to produce process heat that can then be used to generate to do chemistry to generate hydrogen. You can also use a reactor in a more conventional manner to produce electricity, which you can use to electrolyze to produce hydrogen. You would have to make sure that your reactor was optimized to do that specifically, or that the electrolyzer was a heck of a lot easier than you could do that with a conventional PWR. Is it economic? I'm not sure whether that is economic or not, but if you've got to produce your hydrogen in some way, it just comes down to the question of how much kilowatt hour is electricity produced by a PWR in situ on your minefield, producing electricity, producing hydrogen locally, which would be valuable, instead of having to cart the electricity halfway across the country. Funnily enough, South Australia has just got a Royal Commission started at the moment, looking into the use of nuclear energy, and it's essentially exactly the same issue. Can they use nuclear energy to take their mineral resource up the value chain? That's exactly what they're starting out right this minute, which was not the reason I was in Australia. I was in Australia because I teach introduction to nuclear engineering and nuclear materials at UNSW each year for 1 year. Does that kind of answer the question? But again, I think that'd be a great question for an Anglo-South African discussion.
Yeah, can I just ask, what is your opinion on using thorium as a source for nuclear material as opposed to uranium, and is UK looking at that at all?
So with our Indian colleagues, we are looking at the behaviour, we're looking at thermal conductivity and thermomechanical properties of thorium, uranium, thorium, plutonium, mixed oxides at the moment from a purely academic point of view. So clearly, personally, I think that it's interesting, otherwise I wouldn't be engaged in that particular research. The reason the Indians went in for this in the first place is they had no uranium themselves, but they had a hell of a lot of thorium, and they couldn't import uranium because of restrictions, and therefore they went through a thorium cycle. So that got that thorium cycle moving. Of course, if you go back to the very first American reactors, they used a thorium breeder cycle. So technologically, it's possible. There are advantages in that it produces less long-lived actinides, although it does produce some long-lived actinides. So that, again, that question has to be balanced. The issue that the thorium fuel cycle is more proliferation resistance is nonsense. It's often quoted, and I don't believe a word of it. And indeed, I wrote an unpopular article recently saying that with a number of different colleagues in the UK. But like many of these things, for those of us who are old enough, the issue of VHS versus Betamax, which was two types of tapes that you recorded things on. I know the young people in the audience won't have the faintest idea what we're talking about at this point. But Betamax was actually better than VHS, slightly. But it just never got that technological push. It's like silicon and germanium. Germanium actually is a better semiconductor for building chips out of. But everything's aligned to silicon now. That's the real issue for thorium, I think. there are slight advantages, I think. I'm not sure it will ever get used. I mean, eventually, if we go down, in 300 years' time, when the uranium resource is, we're down to lower grades of ore, so the costs to produce fuels, then I wouldn't be in the slightest bit surprised if we go down the thorium cycle, unless we've got fusion reactors running by then. But I'm still going to write papers on it because I think it's really interesting. Actually, the release of fission products from thorium fuel, we're just looking at that at the moment, looks like it's much less in the event of a big accident, which is kind of interesting. But we're just writing on that at the moment.
The advantage of thorium really is it gives you longer fuel cycles.
Yeah.
It gives you better control of reactivity and PWR, and theoretically give you longer fuel cycles, and therefore less downtime.
Yes, although the non-stoichiometry of thorium, you can't go plus X, you can only go a little bit minus X, so you don't get quite the breadth of chemistry.
It's just the reactivity, the problem goes reactivity down at the beginning of the cycle and at the end of the cycle.
Anyway, it's really interesting.
Thank you. Next week.
Yeah, I was going to ask a follow-up question. It was just about your view of technology changing, the rate of technology changing in the future, and which I believe would be central to our issues in discussing these matters in South Africa. Looking at the rate that, for example, solar power comes down in price, and we're talking about also below R1 per kilowatt hour, and the likelihood of that going down further should very much be part of our discussion if we talk about the impact on a South African policy environment, because we as scientists and technologists should give the lead what we believe the rate of technology change will be. And I don't see something in the future immediately like fusion coming on in the near future.
No, nor do I, to be honest.
And so it is, I guess, something that needs our urgent attention if we help any government body in policy decision making.
So absolutely, every technology goes through a sort of decay cycle in terms of cost, and certainly silicon has been hammering its way down that sort of cost. Well, how much further will it fall? It does look like it's gone a long way down, and relatively quickly. I mean, I'm reminded of the costs of magnets in every device now. You use a neodymium boron magnet. This is another sort of area of my research interest, which were invented and within 18 months were in most devices because they were just so much better. So as an example of a disruptive technology, I mean, you probably even hear of them. But they are in absolutely everything. You've all probably got something on you with that sort of technology in it. And it literally went through an 18-month cycle. So that how fast those decays occur are very different for different technologies. So it's hard to say exactly where the solar is on that, but it's probably quite a long way down now at this point. But it will come down a little bit further. Of course, you've always got going back to the storage, you've always got the storage because we certainly were ever be able to solve the fact that the sun's only around for on average 12 hours a day. But it's back to local storage issues. It's pragmatic.
Yeah, I believe chemical storage is a reality, it's a possibility, it's an international dream. I'm talking about the work of Professor Ola. It's something to challenge the storage and the economy of storage with hydropumping schemes. I think that is possible chemically. Whether we work hydrogen, oxygen, or whether we convert CO2 to methanol, that's our dream.
But you always lose it. But with those thermal processes, you always lose 40%. Very, very hard.
Not if it's electrochemical. If it's electrochemical, there's no such intrinsic. We're not going through the Carnot cycle.
No, but you're still going to. There will be losses.
Yeah, there will be losses, but we need to challenge the hydropumping scheme.
Yeah. But I'm not suggesting for a second that in a country like South Africa, solar won't be a big part of your mix. I mean, it will. In the UK, it tends to be a bit more of a challenge. And interestingly, I mean, I was talking to Singaporeans recently, and again, Singapore, solar will not be very good. The reason solar's no good for them, They don't have large land masses to put large solar farms on. You do. Actually, it's not very sunny most of the time. Third, it's very humid, so rubbish grows all over it like crazy. I mean, the big solar panel of the deserts, which people talked about for a long time. Trouble is, lots of sand blows all over everything, and the cleaning issues. It always comes down to these practical issues. But for South Africa, oh yeah, I mean, I can certainly see that as an important part of your local energy mix as time goes on. But it's still a challenge to provide the big baseload capacities that your mines have, which is why I think nuclear will become part of your energy. But I should probably say it's not for me, I hasten to add, to say what South Africa should make in its energy policy. It's absolutely not for me to say that at all.
Sorry, we have to wrap up, but you've asked a few questions. Can I allow the one from the back, please?
Ashlyn Lang from the Daily Telegraph. I'm just wondering what your current understanding is of the South African nuclear deal with Russia. Has South Africa locked itself in too much and put its eggs in too many baskets with the UK like looking and on China and France?
I can duck the question completely, which would be the safe thing to do at this point in time. I've got to learn more. I mean, I only landed yesterday, and I haven't heard genuinely, I haven't heard all the details yet. I can't imagine that a sophisticated country like South Africa would have locked itself into anything that it wouldn't be able to make the best out of. So I've got to learn a bit more about this while I'm here. But I'm sure South Africa is capable of making the right decisions in this regard, whatever that decision is genuinely. What do you think?
Oh, I don't know.
Unfortunately, I have to come in here as the chair. We have to respect the scheduled program and everyone's time. So I'm not going to wrap up, but there are key words that come across is collaboration, partnerships, international, South Africa, UK. So, I mean, those things are what we should be cognizant of. And I'm going to take liberty to quote from Albert Einstein from the annual report of the NSTF of last year. We're concerned for man and his fate must always form the chief interest of all technical endeavors. Never forget this in the midst of your diagrams and equations. So I think that's very important when one looks at the context and what issues that we are faced with. Thank you.
That's fine.